Are you in the market for a new camera but can't decide between the Nikon Z6 III and the Z8? Well, you're in the right place because today I'm going to compare these two fantastic mirrorless cameras to help you make the right choice. Both of these cameras are highly popular in Nikon's lineup, offering a range of impressive features that cater to different needs and preferences. Many photographers face a challenging dilemma when trying to choose between the Z6 III and the Z8. To make your decision easier, let's dive into a detailed comparison of the key specifications of both cameras. So first up, what is the Nikon Z mount and what was its importance over the Nikon F mount? So the first thing that you'll notice if you've been used to shooting on an F mount system is that the Z mount is a lot wider than the standard mount. In fact, it's currently the widest camera mount out of all of the camera manufacturers. So why this is important is that ultimately this wider mount will allow more light to get from the lens into the sensor. However, this is directly related to the aperture, which the Z mount allows the capability to eventually go wider on. In fact, there's a lens that Nikon makes that goes to a maximum aperture of f/0.95. So this is extremely wide. However, with the Z mount, Nikon really hasn't fully taken advantage of this as their marketing provides. So I think in the future, there'll be a lot of growth in that direction. It's just at this point, Nikon hasn't really been able to capitalize on it yet. Additionally, with the Z mount, there is a Z mount adapter that you can use. It's called the FTZ adapter for F2Z. And just with the Z mounts, there's a wide range of lenses that are already available in 2024. There's a lot of different wide angle lenses, standard angle lenses, zoom lenses, telephotos, and prime lenses. So first look at the Nikon Z6 III versus the Z8. The Z6 III comes in at a price tag of $2,499. The Z8 comes in at a price tag of $3,499. Both cameras are great and have some identical firmware features, but there are software and hardware differences the Z8 has that put it over the Z6 III, and that's why it sits at a different price point. So looking at the similarities between these two cameras, the first one that stands out is going to be that they're both Z-mount cameras like we've already discussed. They're both full-frame sensors and have an XSpeed 7 processor. Additionally, they both utilize the EN EL15C batteries and can use the A and B variants to those batteries. Both of these cameras come with 2 memory card slots. They're going to each have a CF Express Type B and an SD UHS 3 slot. Additionally, both of these cameras have in-body image stabilization built into them. And then as I mentioned, there's several settings that are within the firmware that both of these cameras have. So taking a quick look at some of those, they both have pixel shift shooting. Additionally, they both have focus stacking and bracketing available. There's also high ISO noise reduction available in both of these cameras, as well as long exposure noise reduction. And then lastly, they both have interval timer shooting. So that's not a full comprehensive list, but just for me, but that is a list of where they do have some similarity in the shooting menu. When it comes to shooting at high burst rates, they both have pre-shoot burst mode available, which will shoot in JPEG. Both of these cameras also can go to an extended shutter mode, where the shutter length can increase from 30 seconds up to 900 seconds. Speaking of the shutter, they both have an electronic shutter that has a maximum continuous shooting speed of 20 frames per second. And when you're shooting at that speed, your raw buffer size is really important, and they can both shoot over 1,000 frames at that 20 frames per second. Moving on to how you view and set up your compositions, both of these cameras have an electronic viewfinder, and they both have a 2.1 million dot 3.2-inch rear touchscreen LCD. Taking a quick look at the video similarities, both of these have a max video bit depth of 12 bits. They're both capable of shooting in raw video, and they both have a 4K max frame rate of 120 frames per second. And then moving on to the connectivity similarities, both of these cameras come with a headphone jack, a microphone jack, and they have USB Type-C 3.2 Gen 1 connectors with the ability of having an external power supply connected. Additionally, they are both Wi-Fi and Bluetooth capable. If you've made it this far in the video and you're enjoying the content, I'd really appreciate it if you'd hit the like button down below, as well as subscribing to the channel so that you can be one of the first people to know when I have new content that comes out. So now that you know the similarities that these two cameras share, let's go into the differences that really set both of these cameras apart from each other. So looking at size and weight, the Z6 III has dimensions of 5.5 inches by 4 inches by 3.5 inches, and weighs 1.68 pounds or 760 grams. The Z8 comes in at a size of 5.7 inches by 4.7 inches by 3.5 inches, and it weighs 910 grams. Looking at the sensors, the Z6 III stands out with a new technology. It's the only camera right now that has a partially stacked CMOS sensor, and it comes in at 24.5 megapixels. What that enables is faster shutter speeds for this camera. However, the Z8 comes in with a fully stacked CMOS sensor, and it has a maximum resolution of 45.7 megapixels. So quite a few more pixels there when you're shooting with the Z8. So moving on to ISO, the Z6 III has a minimum base ISO of 100, and it's got a max native of 64,000, which is higher than the Z8 that has a maximum native of 25,600 ISO. However, the Z8 has a minimum base ISO of 64. So ISO starts to show where the Z6 III can perform better at low light situations. Moving on to the shutter speeds, the Z6 III is going to have a minimum shutter speed of 1/16,000th of a second, and the Z8 is going to be much faster with a minimum shutter speed of 1/32,000th of a second. So this can be really helpful whenever you have extremely fast moving objects. And then looking at your actual shutter, we already talked about that both of these cameras have an electronic shutter. However, the Z6 III also has a mechanical shutter, whereas the Z8 does not. So one area here that's going to be really important for people shooting fast-moving objects is going to be how quickly the camera can autofocus. So this area does have quite a bit of difference between the two cameras. The Z6 III has 273 focus points, and it also has fewer object detections that can be used over the Z8. And it's also listed as being 20% slower than the Z8. I'll be fully honest here, I don't have a way currently that I can test that, but I'm going to stick with Nikon's assessment here that it's 20% slower than the Z8. One area where the Z6 III does stand out, though, is that it has a maximum low light autofocus sensitivity of minus 8.5 EV. Looking over at the Z8, however, it's going to have 493 focus points. So you've got a lot more focus points to be able to process, which helps you keep your focus on a fast-moving object. You also have some dedicated autofocus modes you can go into, such as birds. Now, where the Z8 doesn't perform as well with autofocusing is going to be the low light autofocus sensitivity, which can only go to negative 7.5 EV. I want to take a quick break here and give a huge shout out to my sponsor for this video, Fort Worth Camera. Fort Worth Camera offers the latest gear and accessories for both professionals and beginners, both in-store and online. Their expert staff is ready to help you find the perfect camera and accessories to capture your world. You can try out gear before you buy through their rental services. From lenses to tripods, drones to lighting, they've got everything you need. Also, don't forget to check out their Funky Town Focus event every May for exclusive deals and workshops. Again, big thanks to Fort Worth Camera for sponsoring this video and supporting my channel. The next area with a difference on these two cameras is going to be the pixel shift shooting, where the Z6 III, once you shoot 32 images and combine those within Nikon software, you're going to come out with a maximum image of around 90 megapixels. However, with the Z8, because of the larger megapixel count, when you take those 32 photos and stack, you can get up to 180 megapixels out of your image. So looking at the max video resolution on these two cameras, the Z6 III is going to come in at a maximum video resolution of 6K at 60 frames per second. However, the Z8 is going to be able to come in shooting at 8K at 30 frames per second. There are options to get faster frame rates by lowering the resolution. So if you go shoot at 1080p, the Z6 III is going to be able to shoot at 120 frames per second, and the Z8 is going to be able to shoot at 240 frames per second. So that's all great with the recording. However, there are limitations to how long you can record with each of these cameras. The Z6 III is listed as being able to record for up to 125 minutes, whereas the Z8 shows that it can shoot up to 90 minutes. However, it's pretty well documented that the Z8 can't get past about 20 minutes in recording without getting an overheat warning on your memory card. So just be aware of that, and time will tell if the Z6 III runs into the same overheating issues since it has a similar build quality. So switching gears from the video, but still looking at differences, the LCD screens are different on these two cameras. The Z6 III is fully articulating, which is going to be great for those shooting content where they need to be able to flip the camera out to see if they're in frame, kind of like what I'm doing right now. But the Z8 only has a dual axis LCD screen that can't flip out fully. Looking at the viewfinder resolutions, the Z6 III has a resolution of 5.76 million dots, where the Z8 is much lower at 3.69 million dots. However, I can tell you with my eye, the Z8 looks great at 3.69 million. There is one difference in the connections that are provided on these cameras, and that comes down to the USB ports. The Nikon Z6 III only has one USB-C port, whereas the Z8 has two, one being dedicated for data transfer, the other one being dedicated for power. Speaking of power again, when you look at the battery life on these two cameras, the Z6 III is able to last a little bit longer per the specs in the manual. I found that it's averaging about 385 shots for the EN-EL15C battery, whereas the Z8 averages about 345 shots. So slightly less, however, still pretty close. So one thing I do want to note, even though there are a lot of these differences, I think these cameras are both fantastic and they are able to perform in most situations that you put them in. But each do seem to edge the others out in certain aspects. So I want to walk through which camera I would choose for which aspect of photography. So first off, I love astrophotography. So if I were going with a strictly dedicated astrophotography camera, I'd probably go with the Z6 III here. Mostly because it's got better low light performance. It's got a higher maximum native ISO. Also, the pixels are larger, which allow me to bring in more light per pixel, which plays into why that performance is better with this particular camera. However, I would definitely say the Z8 does produce great astrophotography. Next up, if you're somebody that's shooting birds or wildlife or maybe sports photography, you're probably going to want something that is top of the line with respects to autofocusing and shutter speed. Because of that, I would recommend going with the Z8 if this is the area of photography that you specialize in. Also, one of the firmware features that the Z8 has is an auto capture setting where you can set the camera up and basically create a camera trap just based from the settings. So that can be really useful in these types of photography. So as you probably know, I mostly specialize in photography. However, I do think it's worth looking at video for this review. I think hands down the Z6 III is the camera that I would take. A lot of that has to do with the low light capability that the camera has. And although it does lack performance in the area of resolution, being that the Z6 III can, only shoot in 6K and not 8K, you can get higher frames per second still shooting at 1080. And you also get a longer recording time at 125 minutes. And I'll bring it up again. The Z8, it's pretty well known that it cannot handle going past 20 minutes without the memory card overheating. So you're automatically limited right there with the Z8. Reasons why I would choose the Z6 III other than stated above. If you've got a lower budget, I can promise you're not going to be disappointed with the Z6 III. If you're somebody that also doesn't need the extra pixels for printing, it can be beneficial to have fewer actually, especially in the low light scenarios. And then also if you just want to have a good dual purpose camera for shooting photo and video, I think the Z6 III wins out there. However, there's scenarios where I would want to choose the Z8 over the Z6 III. First off, if the money is not a factor, you might be more inclined to go with the Z8. Additionally, your items that play into that is you can shoot faster moving subjects with this camera because you can get down to the 1/32,000th of a second shutter speed. And additionally, shooting those faster objects, the autofocus is definitely better on the Z8 than the Z6 III. And then lastly, if you're not going to be as focused on video and you're doing more of just photography, the Z8's probably the way you want to go there. If you plan on purchasing one of these cameras for birding or sports photography, you'll definitely want to check out my video here reviewing the Nikon Z 600mm f4 VRTC lens. It's a beast.